when a veteran journalist meets an unyielding maverick. What happens when a seasoned political journalist pushes against an unstoppable force? What unfolds when sharp, calculated questions collide with a figure who rewrites the rules of media engagement? You're about to witness one of the most electrifying political interviews ever recorded, where civility unraveled into raw verbal combat, leaving the studio stunned. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. This story will challenge everything you think you know about political interviews. This wasn't a standard exchange. It was unfiltered confrontation at its peak. The studio lights burned bright as Rachel Maddow adjusted her glasses one last time. Across from her sat Ted Cruz, leaning back with his signature self-assured grin. The Texas senator looked at ease, but those familiar with him noticed the slight clench in his jaw, the subtle tap of his fingers on the armrest. "Good evening, Senator," Rachel began, her voice carrying her trademark clarity. "Thanks for joining us." Cruz nodded, eyes fixed on her. "Rachel, I'm always up for a real discussion, though your network's recent takes have been, let's say, colorful." The first jab landed before the real questions began. Rachel sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere. The crew behind the cameras leaned in, feeling a storm brewing. "Senator, let's start with your tax reform claims," Rachel said, glancing at her notes. "You've touted massive middle-class benefits, but economists dispute your figures. How do you address critics who say your numbers are exaggerated?" Cruz's grin didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. "Rachel, you're diving into the fake news pool already. I thought we'd have a serious talk, not another spin job dressed up as journalism." Rachel pressed on, her journalistic instincts sharp. "These aren't opinions, Senator. These are studies from institutions like the Tax Policy Center, showing discrepancies in your claimed benefits." Cruz chuckled bitterly. "The Tax Policy Center, Rachel? Funny how those folks praise tax cuts when they fit their narrative, but now they're your gospel when it suits your agenda." Rachel leaned forward. "Senator, these are nonpartisan analysts who've served under both parties. Their methods are consistent." Cruz's voice rose slightly. "Consistent? Rachel, you've been in this game long enough to know consistent is code for cherry-picking data to fit a story. These aren't neutral academics. They're part of the establishment that's been gunning for me since I got to Washington." The camera crew exchanged glances. They'd filmed countless interviews, but the air crackled with something different. This wasn't going to be the usual political waltz. "Senator," Rachel said, her tone steady despite the tension, "you're suggesting career analysts with decades of expertise are conspiring against you. That's a bold claim. Where's your evidence?" Cruz sat up, his grin vanishing. "Evidence? How about we talk about bias instead? Let's compare your coverage of me to, say, Elizabeth Warren. Want to pull up those transcripts, Rachel? Because I'd bet my boots they'd show a stark difference." Rachel held firm. "I've challenged every politician I've interviewed, Senator." "That's journalism." Cruz laughed, no warmth in it. "Journalism? This feels more like a cross-examination. Not one question about my achievements. Not one nod to what I've done for Texas. That's not journalism, Rachel. That's advocacy in a blazer." Rachel felt her composure tested. She'd interviewed leaders worldwide, but Cruz had a knack for flipping every question into an attack on the questioner. "Senator, I'm asking about factual inconsistencies. If you want to discuss achievements, I'm open, but shouldn't we start with accurate data?" Cruz's voice grew louder, and the sound techs glanced nervously at their levels. "Accurate data? According to who? Your producers who've got an axe to grind? Your network that's been after me for years? The same media that swore I'd never win my Senate seat?" The 2018 election reference shifted Cruz's demeanor. His calm gave way to the combative fire his base adored and critics dreaded. Rachel faced a choice: pivot to softer questions for a polished exchange or press on, knowing she was stepping into a verbal minefield. She chose to push. "Senator, we're discussing tax data from federal agencies, not media outlets. Are you claiming government analysts fudged numbers to undermine you?" Cruz stared for a long moment, the silence heavy. When he spoke, his voice carried a chilling calm, more unsettling than his earlier heat. "Rachel, let's talk about these analysts. They're not just number crunchers in ivory towers. They're bureaucrats, entrenched in the D.C. machine, choosing which stats to highlight, which to bury, all to push the narrative their bosses want. Rachel's jaw tightened. Conspiracy theories were what she'd hoped to avoid, but here they were. Senator, these are civil servants with advanced degrees, using decades-old methodologies, regardless of who's in office. Cruz leaned forward, eyes blazing. Rachel, don't play naive. You know better. When I pushed tax cuts, every report came with caveats, revisions, asterisks. But under Democratic policies, those same stats were treated as sacred. It's not methodology. It's manipulation. Rachel countered, economic reports always include context. But Cruz was building to something bigger. Context, he mocked. Is that what you call it when my tax cuts saved families thousands, but your stories lead with unsustainable? When we boosted jobs, but you focus on deficits? That's not context, Rachel. That's a hit job. Rachel tried to steer back. Senator, let's focus on specifics. The Treasury reported tax cut benefits skewed heavily toward the wealthy, not the middle class as you claimed. How do you explain that? Cruz's face reddened. Explain? I'll explain. Your experts use narrow metrics, ignoring trickle-down effects, job growth, business investment. They don't count the broader impact of deregulation that fueled our economy. Rachel pressed, even accounting for those, independent studies say your claims overstate benefits by 25%. Cruz snapped, independent. There's no such thing in D.C. Every economist you cite is tied to left-leaning think tanks, universities that despise conservative policies, or firms banking on government contracts. Show me one truly independent analyst who hasn't been canceled by your crowd. The studio grew stifling, whether from lights or tension. Rachel adjusted her collar, a move Cruz's sharp eyes caught. Feeling the heat, Rachel? He asked with a cold smirk. Or are you realizing your whole setup's built on shaky ground? Rachel kept her cool. Senator, I'm seeking factual clarity. But her voice held a hint of strain. Clarity? Cruz shot back. From the network that called border security xenophobic? That said inflation was temporary? That swore I'd lose in 18? Your clarity has been wrong every time. Rachel knew Cruz was dragging her into his arena, turning every fact into a media critique. Backing off would validate his attacks, so she pressed on. We're not discussing predictions. We're talking tax data you claimed credit for. Cruz scoffed. Data? Rachel, data's a tool. Assumptions behind it? Pure politics. Deciding what counts as income, how to measure savings. Those aren't math. They're agendas. Rachel felt like she was wrestling smoke. Every fact was met with a philosophical assault on data itself. Senator, if we can't trust federal stats, economists, or analysts, what's our baseline for truth? Cruz paused, not out of doubt but as if readying a storm. You want truth, Rachel? Truth is results. Truth is what Texans felt. Lower taxes, more jobs, stronger communities under my policies versus the chaos now. Truth is gas prices, border safety, global respect. That's the math that matters. Rachel saw an opening. That's what I'm trying to discuss. Your specific tax claims for an honest comparison. Cruz stood abruptly, and Rachel braced for a walkout. Instead, he paced, energy crackling. Honest comparison? You're not after honesty, Rachel. You're fishing for gotchas with rigged stats from biased sources, downplaying my successes while ignoring Biden's failures. Cruz paced like a predator. You want numbers? Let's talk real ones. My town halls pack hotels, fill restaurants, hire locals. That's economic impact your stats ignore. Let's talk your network's tanking ratings since you started this crusade against conservatives. Let's talk trust in media at all-time lows. Rachel stayed seated, projecting calm. Senator, ratings don't change tax data. Cruz whirled to face her. Data? The only reality is you've lost credibility with Americans. You act like a truth arbiter, but everyone sees your agenda. Rachel countered. My job is to ask tough questions, protected by the First Amendment. Cruz laughed coldly. First Amendment? Don't lecture me, Rachel. You've turned journalism into activism. hiding behind the Constitution when called out. What would the founders think of a press that syncs up to take down people they don't like? Cameras struggled to track Cruz's gestures, his voice booming. Rachel knew the interview was far beyond her plan. "Senator, you're alleging a conspiracy across thousands of journalists," she said, aiming for reason. "Isn't that far-fetched?" Cruz stopped, addressing the camera directly. "Folks, this is the game. Call out their bias and they cry, 'Conspiracy.' But it's not hidden. It's blatant." Rachel tried to refocus. "Senator, let's stick to tax claims." Cruz spun back, scornful. "You're obsessed, Rachel. Tax claims, tax claims. You know what's creating jobs? My work, my fight for Texas. Every speech, every event, hotels booked, vendors paid. That's real impact your numbers miss," Rachel protested. "That's not systemic tax policy." Cruz's voice hit a peak. "Systemic? Look at today. Inflation, open borders, global disrespect. That's systemic failure, backed by the experts you quote." Rachel made a final push. "Senator, we're here to discuss your record, your tax claims." Cruz sat, leaning forward, pointing. "My record? I cut taxes, boosted jobs, strengthened America. I delivered for Texans. Secure borders, energy growth, global respect." Rachel tried again. "But your specific tax figures." Cruz cut her off, voice low and sharp. "Rachel, the real figures are families better off under my policies than now. Record low unemployment for minorities, manufacturing jobs back, things your experts said couldn't happen." Rachel felt trapped between duty and futility. "I'm not denying low unemployment, Senator. I'm asking about inflated claims." Cruz stood slowly, voice final. "Rachel, you're asking me to apologize for believing in America, for trusting Texas workers over bureaucrats with spreadsheets. You treat stats like scripture when they said my wins were impossible." "I'm asking for accuracy," Rachel said quietly. "Accuracy?" Cruz's smile was icy. "What's accurate is this interview shows why Americans don't trust media. You've spent more time nitpicking my optimism than questioning Biden's failures. While you parse tax stats, Americans see why they can't trust you to tell their story." Silence gripped the studio. Rachel met Cruz's stare, the crew frozen. Finally, she spoke. "Senator, thank you for your time." Cruz adjusted his tie, grin returning. "Thank you, Rachel. Quite the education, wasn't it?" As lights dimmed and cameras stopped, everyone knew they'd seen something extraordinary. Not just an interview derailed, but a collapse of the traditional media-politician dynamic. So, there it is, one of the most explosive political clashes on record. Did Rachel push too far, or was Cruz's response out of bounds? Comment below with your take, and subscribe for more stories like this.